If fear were a tradable commodity on Wall Street, nothing would outperform it. Not gold, not oil, not tech, nothing would see daily gains on the index like FEAR. Fear is defined as an unpleasant, often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger, or as an anxious concern, and, because of Judeo-Christian influence on the English language, reverence or awe of God, according to Merriam-Webster. Fear is a vital response to physical and emotional danger. If we didn't feel it, we couldn't protect ourselves from legitimate threats, according to psychology today. Fears that paralyze us or control our daily lives are known as phobias, a distortion of reality that impedes us from something, some place, or even some person. I did some searching this week as I was thinking about our new series on fear, and I looked up phobias to see what are the top phobias that we experience in the United States. And so I went to a place called fearof.net, and I found the top 100 phobias listed there. Don't worry, we're not going to go through all of them today. Number one on the list, of course, arachnophobia. Remember the movie, right? The fear of spiders. And according to fearof.net, this fear impacts 4 times more women than it does men. 48% of women that were polled for this suffer from arachnophobia versus 12% of men. They're wrong. The men just don't want to admit it. Right? It brings to mind that scene in the Harry Potter movie, the very first Harry Potter movie, when they're going into the Aragon's cave and Ron says, "Spiders. Why did it have to be spiders? Why couldn't it just be butterflies?" Thank you, Nick, for that illustration. Acrophobia. Acrophobia, the fear of heights. I suspect many of us have that. 5% of the general population suffer from this phobia. If you would like to test that, we have some lights up here that need to be worked on. We'll be glad to see if that one impacts you. Cynophobia, the fear of dogs. If you had that, you didn't show up for worship today. This includes everything from small poodles to large Great Danes. Claustrophobia, oh, we know that one, don't we? The fear of small spaces like elevators and small rooms and people sitting next to us in church. Aerophobia, we know that one. About 25 million Americans share in their fear of flying, no matter what the device that they're flying in is. Aerophobia. Fear is powerful. And by design, it has to be for our survival. If our amygdala, part of our brain deep in, did not react to the stimuli it receives from all of our senses, the 5 senses that we know easily and other senses we may have, to determine whether something is a threat to our safety and then determine a course of action, fight or flight as it may be, our species, if it didn't do that, would have been extinct many millennia ago. Fear is powerful, and as such becomes a tool or weapon of choice of many who wish to exploit it to manipulate others to buy into their ideology or their line of rubbish, as it may be. Politicians know this very well. CEOs and marketing execs know this very well. Cable news producers know this very well. Preachers know this very well. And parents know this too. It would appear that we have millions of things to be afraid of these days, more fears than ever, despite the fact that we live in a time when we have better knowledge of the universe we exist in than any other time in the history of humanity. And that's tweetable, in case you're wondering. I've been reading the book Unafraid, Living with Hope and Courage in Uncertain Times by the Reverend Adam Hamilton, senior pastor of the United Methodist Church of the Resurrection in Kansas City. In the book, Hamilton shares two acronyms for fear. One you're probably familiar with: false events appearing real. False events appearing real, referring to the distortion of reality like the ones we named as phobias. Reverend Hamilton suggests a new acronym that may be a bit more helpful as we think about fear over the next several weeks. Face, examine, attack, release. Face your fears with faith. Examine your assumptions in light of facts. Attack your anxieties with action. And release your cares to God. So over the next several weeks, through a series of messages I'm calling Fear 101, we're going to discover together how our faith in God may help us recognize our fears for what they are, understand our fears in relationship to our faith, and overcome our fears with courage and with hope. Some of this series will be based on Reverend Hamilton's book, Unafraid, and I recommend it to you as companion reading this month, especially as an election draws near and fear arrives in your mailbox, your inbox, your newsfeed, and on your television and radio daily, paid for by citizens to elect so-and-so. When we think of the second acronym, fear, and facing your fears with faith, we may turn to the words of ancient scripture for inspiration and guidance. The words fear or afraid appear more than 400 times in scripture. An important topic for our ancestors of faith, no doubt, but the antidote to fear was no less important, as the phrase, "do not be afraid," appears over 100 times in Scripture. Fear has always been a big deal for people of faith, for humanity. Perhaps no other Scripture captures this sentiment than the 27th Psalm that we read together. I don't preach from the Psalms very often, you may have noticed that. To be honest, they are not the best sermon fodder, because in most cases, the poetry speaks for itself. And to interpret the poet's prose into a practical message for today is somewhat dangerous at least, and may miss the original meaning entirely. Nevertheless, I'm going to face this fear this morning with faith and courage in God's presence and in front of you. And that's precisely, I think, what the psalmist seems to be proclaiming in the very well-known beginning verses of the 27th Psalm that we read together. The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the stronghold of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? When evildoers assail me to devour my flesh, and adversaries and foes, they shall stumble and fall. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. Though war rise up against me, yet I will be confident. I was surprised when I went on fearof.net to look at the top 10 list of phobias that I didn't find nyctophobia high on that list. Now, just to be clear, nyctophobia is not a fear of anyone named Nick out there. Nick, you're okay. It's the fear of the dark. Now, there are other names for fear of the dark. You can look them up too. But neither one of them were high on the list of the top phobias experienced. But then again, as I said, we live in a time when we understand more about our universe and we have conquered darkness with LED lights so bright we cannot even see the stars on a clear night. So the fear of the dark may not be as powerful as it once was. But for the ancients, darkness was very high on their list of fears. So much so, in fact, that as the priestly exiles tried to calm the fears of the people of Israel, carried off by the Babylonians in the 6th century BC, when the psalmist lamented by the rivers of Babylon, there we sat down and there we wept when we remembered Zion. On the willows there we hung our harps, for there our captors asked us for songs, and our tormentors asked for mirth, saying, "Sing us one of the songs of Zion." How could we sing the Lord's song in a foreign land? Facing the fear of Babylonian captivity, the priestly exiles told a story of creation, of a creator of the universe who established order and goodness and light. It went something like this. In the beginning, when God created the heavens and the earth was a formless void, and darkness covered the face of the deep, while a wind from God swept over the face of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. You recognize that story from the first chapter, the first words of Genesis. And so when the psalmist sings, "The Lord is my light and my salvation, whom shall I fear?" the poet expresses literally what it means to face your fears with faith. For the first hearers, light, which came from God, meant security, meant safety, and the ability to survive. Light still does, but we generate most of our own light to ward off the darkness these days. The sun was worshipped by most other religious systems of ancient times, the source of growth for plants, the source of warmth to ward off the cold of night. Light, whether sun-produced or moonlight, which was also worshipped. The ancients did not know that the moon reflected the sun as we do now. Or whether it was by firelight from wick or pyre, light was the antidote to their fear of the dark. And for the ancient Hebrews, Yahweh, or God, the creator of the universe, conquered the chaos of darkness with light. With light. So the psalmist sings, "God is the stronghold of life. Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear." If you've ever studied ancient sieges of fortified citadels, then you know that one of the fears of those under siege was running out of oil for their torches, running out of firewood for their campfires. The enemy may gain advantage if you're going hungry or if you are stuck in the dark. The psalmist proclaims with faith in God as my light, "They shall stumble and fall, and I will be confident in the face of my greatest enemies." Part of recognizing and understanding and overcoming our fears is asking questions about the source of our fears. The source of our fears. The psalmist sings, "One thing I ask of the Lord, that will I seek after, to live in the house of the Lord all the days of my life, to behold the beauty of the Lord, and to inquire in God's temple." To inquire in God's temple. Much of the focus on this verse over the years is often on living in the house of the Lord eternally. Eternally. This passage gets repeated at funerals often. Or beholding the beauty of the Lord found in natural beauty or in great temples and sanctuaries, the glory of worship. But I'm going to suggest, facing my fear preaching from the Psalms, that the last phrase is the most important: inquiring in God's temple. In other words, asking questions and seeking instruction for our lives. Now that might seem simple to you, but if you were a religious elite of the time, one of the leaders of the temple, one of the things that you did not like very much is when people came to ask you hard questions. It's like the pastor who on Sunday morning, out shaking hands after the sermon, and the little 7-year-old boy comes up and says, "How come we never hear about the dinosaurs, preacher? What happened to the dinosaurs? Did God create the dinosaurs, preacher?" Now, there are some who would say, "Oh, it's in there, you're just missing it. Don't question, listen to the story, and you'll get it all down." They're just in between the lines, so to speak. That's not true here. That's not the answer you'll get here, and I won't give you that answer right this moment. But those tough questions are welcome here. Those difficult questions about faith are welcomed, and I believe that the psalmist is saying that we do best at recognizing, understanding, and overcoming our fears when we're not afraid to ask questions about them. When we're not afraid to ask questions about them. As the poet continues, we read, "Hear, O Lord, when I cry aloud. Be gracious to me and answer me. Teach me your way, O Lord, and lead me on a level path because of my enemies. Do not give me up to the will of my adversaries, for false witnesses have risen against me, and they are breathing out violence." Our fear response has a way of shutting down our ability to hold perspective. If you study the response of fear in the brain, when the amygdala says, "This is a threat to us," in the flight or fight that you perceive after that, you decide on that course of action, there are physical things that happen to your body, and among those are tunnel vision. Your vision, instead of broadening to see the whole of everything around you, narrows in on your fear, on the point of the threat. And you don't see anything else. Perhaps you've been in one of those moments. So our fear response has a way of shutting down our ability to hold perspective, to maintain rationality and logical reasoning, to ask if that which we fear is really a threat, or are we just lacking more information? Are we succumbing to the will of a manipulative person, a bully, for instance? Are we cowering under our own prejudices and ignorance? And is our response aligned with God's will for humanity? All of those things kind of get blocked out by that natural response. In the presence of great fear, the psalmist, with faith in God, trust in God's peaceful will for humanity, examines the whole facts, plots a course of nonviolent action, which is the way of God's kingdom or realm, exemplified for us in the life and teachings of Jesus, exemplified at the table that Christians gather at all around the world this day to celebrate, exemplified in one who would not treat violence with violence, but who would lay his life down for such as you and even me. And the psalmist releases all worry to God, saying, "I believe that I shall see the goodness of the Lord in the land of the living. Wait for the Lord. Be strong and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord." Fear is a powerful part of being human. It's useful and dangerous at the same time. Too often, our response individually and corporately is to choose violence over nonviolence. We buy into fear-mongering and choose to to err on perceived safety over insecurity and justify eliminating perceived threats by any means necessary, even if that means innocent casualties. Fear locks the doors of our homes and our churches to the most vulnerable people in our community while we debate the size of our next 4K television, and buildings dedicated to serving God sit warm and empty on freezing night after night. Fear holds us paralyzed by an economic system that benefits a few and leaves out most. Fear of difference and diversity creates barriers even to tables of communion, even on this World Communion Sunday. Fear is powerful. If you want an example of that, if you are a social media person and you have a Facebook account and you haven't seen fear raising up its ugly head for the last 48 hours, then you haven't checked your Facebook account. Because of a hoax that was put out that tells people that their account's been hacked and they have all these unreal friend requests. It's a hoax. It's pumpkin spice season. It's October. It's a hoax. And all it takes is a little Google search to find out before you buy in to that fear. Fear is powerful. And if you don't want to live in fear, if you want to heed the 100+ times God through voices of Scripture says, do not be afraid. It begins by recognizing your assumptions may be a distortion of reality. And your reactions may not be God's will for humanity. Living unafraid, with courage and with hope, begins by asking this simple question: what am I really afraid of? What am I really afraid of?